She was worth $703 billion. And for 3 years, 3 quiet, deliberate, unwavering years, she let everyone around her believe she was nobody. Her name is Claire Harmon, and this is everything you need to know before this story destroys you. She married Derek Whitfield without telling him who she was, not because she was ashamed, because her grandfather, Eliot Harmon, the man who built a $703 billion dynasty from nothing, had given her one rule before he died. Let them show you their whole hand first, then move. So Claire watched. She watched Derek take his mistress, Nicole Reeves, to restaurants while she ate alone. She watched his mother, Sandra, catalog reasons to despise her with the focused energy of a woman who mistakes quiet for weakness. She got pregnant. She kept watching. And when she had seen enough, when the hand was fully shown, she walked into a delivery room and did something no one in the history of this marriage saw coming. She died. For 45 minutes she let Derek sit in that waiting room and receive the news. She let his shoulders drop in relief. She let Sandra walk into that private room, stand over the covered shape on the bed, and laugh low, satisfied, ugly, and say, "Finally, that nobody is out of my son's life." And then her doctor walked back in and said the words that began the demolition. "The woman under that sheet is not dead." Claire was alive. Her son was healthy. The divorce had been filed at 6:04 that morning, and the financial disclosure attached to it showed a number Derek read 3 times before his brain allowed it to become real. $703 billion. That was part 1. Part 2 was where the story stopped being about a divorce and became about something far older and far darker. Because while Claire was dismantling her marriage, something that had been watching from the shadows for 22 years finally moved. His name is Grant Aldrin Harmon, Claire's uncle, disinherited by her grandfather in 2003 for reasons the official record listed as embezzlement and corporate misconduct, and the sealed envelope Eliot gave his attorney listed as something catastrophically worse. Grant built a $41 billion shadow empire called Aldrin Capital and spent 2 decades constructing an operation designed to take back what he believed was his. He placed a mole inside Claire's board of directors. He forged a document challenging the will. He turned Patrice Monroe, Claire's most trusted delivery room nurse, using her daughter's leukemia as leverage. He engineered Nicole's introduction to Derek years before the affair began. He threatened a federal witness. He tried to bribe Derek into signing a false affidavit. And when all of that failed, he sent someone into a parking garage at 6:45 in the morning. And Claire Harmon, who had survived 3 years of invisible cruelty, who had survived the delivery room, who had survived the board meeting and the forged will, and the FBI filing and Grant's phone call in the hospital lobby, went down. A bullet left shoulder, 22 feet, a face she recognized stepping out of the shadow. A face she trusted. She survived. Barely. This is part 3. This is where the patience ends, the evidence lands, and every person in this story finally receives exactly what they earned. Sit down, don't move, it ends here. The bullet did not kill her. This is the first and most important fact of part 3, and it needs to be stated plainly before anything else, because the entire rest of this story depends on Claire Harmon being alive. Not just alive in the biological sense, the breathing and heartbeat sense, but alive in the specific, undiminished, fully operational sense that had characterized every moment of her existence since the morning she decided to stop being invisible. The bullet entered her left shoulder at an upward angle, fired from 22 feet, a suppressed weapon, a parking garage at 6:45 in the morning when the light was the color of old concrete and the city had not yet fully committed to being awake. She lost consciousness from blood loss before Marcus Thorne reached her. He reached her in 11 seconds. He would spend the rest of this story, and one suspects, a considerable portion of the rest of his life, measuring everything against those 11 seconds, running the arithmetic of distance and reaction time, and the specific, irrevocable consequences of a woman who had left without calling position. Surgery took 4 hours. She came out of it on the 14th floor of the same hospital where she had given birth 9 days earlier. The same wing, the same quality of institutional quiet, the same window with the same view of a city that had, in the past 9 days, learned her name and was still learning what it meant. Her son was in the room when she opened her eyes. Eliot Ashe had arranged it, had called Dr. Webb's secure line and said, "She's going to need to see him first." Webb had agreed without deliberation because Webb had known this woman since before she was born and understood, without needing it explained, the specific hierarchy of what she would need in this order. Claire opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling, looked at her son, said nothing. Held the silence the way she had always held silence, not as absence, but as its own kind of fullness. Then she looked at Thorne. He was standing at the foot of the bed. The expression on his face was the expression of a man conducting a silent trial of himself, meticulous, unsparing, the kind of internal proceeding that reaches a verdict before the defense has finished speaking. "Don't," Claire said. He looked at her. "Don't do that to yourself. I left without calling position. That's on me." "Claire." "Thorne." He stopped. The room was quiet for a moment. "Who was it?" she asked. He held her gaze. 1 second. 2. The way you hold a gaze when the answer is going to change something and you are giving the person in the bed the last fraction of time before the change arrives. "Mistress," he said. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a fact landing in a place that had been left deliberately open. A place that Claire had chosen not to armor, not because she was naive about the possibility, but because she had decided, at some point in the past 9 days, that she was not going to spend her life building walls against the people she loved. Her grandfather had done that. It had cost him 22 years of a particular loneliness that she had watched without fully understanding until she read his journal. She was not going to do the same. Mistress Monroe. The nurse who had warned her about Nicole's hospital visits, the nurse she had asked to remember everything, the nurse who had worn the body camera, the nurse who had stood stone-faced in the doorway while Sandra laughed, the nurse who had been, in the complete operational architecture of Claire's plan, one of 3 people trusted without condition or clause. Claire looked at the ceiling. "How long?" she asked. "Preliminary assessment puts the timeline at 31 months, Thorne said. "Before the delivery room, before the camera, before all of it." 31 months. Claire had been 8 months pregnant when Mistress was turned. Which meant Mistress had worn that body camera with Grant's knowledge. Which meant the footage, Sandra's laugh, Derek's shoulder drop, all of it, had gone simultaneously to Caldwell's team, and to an Aldrin Capital server somewhere that the FBI was currently trying to locate. Grant had been inside the innermost room, the whole time. "What did he have on her?" Claire asked. Thorne set a folder on the bed. Her daughter, Maya, 12 years old, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, diagnosed 3 years ago. Treatment protocol runs approximately $340,000 annually. Insurance covered 40%. Claire looked at the folder, did not open it. "Grant covered the rest," she said, statement not question. "Through a medical foundation, untraceable on the surface. It took our financial forensics team 6 hours to find the connection." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary, indifferent way, taxis and delivery trucks, and people who were not currently lying in a hospital bed, trying to integrate the fact that the woman they had trusted most in the room where their child was born had been standing on the other side of a wall the entire time. "Where is she now?" "Federal custody. She hasn't spoken since the arrest. Her attorney is requesting a cooperation agreement. Does Maya know? No. Make sure she continues treatment, Claire said. Whatever Mistress did, Maya had no part in it. Contact the foundation handling the payments. Ensure continuity. Do it today, before anything else, before any other conversation we have this morning. Thorne stared at her. Claire, she shot you. Her daughter is 12 years old and has leukemia, Claire said. Do it today. Thorne left to make the call. Claire lay in the bed alone for a few minutes. The baby in the carrier beside her, making small sounds, investigating the ceiling with the absolute focused attention of someone for whom everything is still new and therefore equally significant. She thought about her grandfather, about the entry in his journal, the one he had written 3 days before he died, with the unsteady handwriting of a man spending his last reserves on the most important things. She is already herself, Elias had written. Whatever comes after I am gone, she is already herself. She thought about the sealed envelope Elias had given Caldwell, 22 years of carried weight. She thought about the second envelope, the one the paralegal had found in Elias' personal correspondence, the one addressed to 2 people. One of them was her. One of them was Mistress Monroe. He knew, she thought. He knew for 2 years, and he said nothing because he believed the love was real. He believed the love was stronger than what Grant had built around it. She looked at her son. He was right, she thought, in the end, in the most important way. He was exactly right. She reached for his hand. He wrapped 4 fingers around her thumb with the automatic, total commitment of someone who has not yet learned to be careful about who they hold on to. She looked at him. Okay, she said quietly, to him, to the room, to all of it. Let's finish this. Here is what you need to know about Mistress Monroe before this story assigns her a verdict. She was 51 years old. She had worked in that hospital for 14 years with the specific, unglamorous dedication of someone who chose the work for the right reasons and found, over time, that the right reasons were enough to sustain her even when the hours and the pay and the emotional weight of it suggested otherwise. She had raised Maya alone since the age of 3. Maya's father had gone before the diagnosis, before the hospital visits, before the particular shape of their life had fully set. He was not a villain. He was simply gone, which, in its own way, is its own category of damage. When Maya was diagnosed, Mistress had done what mothers do. She had fought. She had appealed. She had worked double shifts and triple shifts and had conversations with insurance administrators that she had to conduct with the specific, performed calm of a person who knows that the moment they stop being calm, the person on the other end of the phone stops listening. She had done all of this, and she had kept doing it for 2 years, and she had not broken. And then she sat in the hospital cafeteria after a 12-hour shift, too tired for the drive home, buying time with a coffee she barely tasted, and a man sat across from her. He knew Maya's name. He knew her diagnosis, her room number, her treatment schedule. He knew everything. He said, "There's a foundation that wants to help. Full coverage, no conditions. The payments begin Monday." And Mistress had looked at him across that table, tired, hollowed out, the specific empty of a woman who has been pouring herself into an impossible situation for 2 years. And she had known, with the crystalline clarity that exhaustion sometimes produces, that this was not a gift. "What do I have to do?" she said. "For now," the man said, "just watch." For 14 months, that was all. Just watch. Report on patients, names, schedules, the kind of information that in the daily accounting Mistress made of herself she could almost frame as harmless, background noise, administrative data, not worth the weight she gave it in the 3 a.m. moments when the accounting wouldn't balance no matter how she arranged the numbers. And then Claire arrived on her floor. And just watch became something else entirely. Mistress had told herself a story about what she was doing. Everyone who does a terrible thing tells themselves a story. Hers was simple. One woman's secrets were worth less than one child's life. Any mother would make the same calculation. The math was clear. She had maintained this story through the prenatal visits and the body camera and the delivery room and Sandra's laugh and all of it. Maintained it with the daily, effortful discipline of a person who knows, somewhere underneath the discipline, that the story has holes in it, but who cannot afford, financially, emotionally, practically, to examine the holes. She had maintained it right up until she stepped out of the shadow in the parking garage and looked at Claire's face and saw grief, not fear, not anger, grief, the grief of someone losing something they had chosen to leave open. In that second, that single, specific, irrevocable second before everything happened, the story collapsed. All at once. The way things that have been held together by will alone collapse when the will, finally and completely, runs out. She pulled the trigger because she had been instructed to, and because she had already begun the motion, and because stopping in that specific second would have required a decision-making capacity that she had already spent. She did not pull it to kill. Grant's instruction had been to incapacitate, to buy 72 hours, to create enough disruption in Claire's operation that the FBI's momentum slowed while his attorneys worked. Mistress had aimed for the shoulder. She was, even in the most terrible moment of her life, still trying to do the least damage available to her. She gave her cooperation statement 6 days after her arrest. 112 pages. 17 communications with Grant's fixer documented in detail. 4 years of intelligence reporting cataloged. The body camera transmission protocol confirmed. The full financial routing of Maya's treatment payments. The shell structure, the foundation, the connection back to Aldrin Capital, laid out with the methodical precision of a woman who had been keeping her own records because she understood from the very first cafeteria meeting that this would end badly, and she wanted, when it did, to have something to offer. On the last page, in the section asking if there was anything else she wished to add, Mistress wrote 4 sentences in her own handwriting. I knew Claire Harmon was a good person. I watched her for almost 3 years, and I never once saw her be unkind to anyone without reason. I told myself the math justified it. There is no math that justified it. She set down the pen, looked at the page, then asked the federal agent across from her, with a steadiness that the agent would later describe as the most composure she had ever witnessed in an interview room at the end of a confession. Is her son okay? The agent said yes. Mistress nodded. Said nothing else that session. On the 5th morning after the parking garage, Derek Whitfield walked into the FBI's New York field office without an appointment, without an attorney, and without being asked. He had called ahead at 7 a.m. to confirm someone would see him. The duty officer had taken his name and said he would check. Derek had given his name twice, carefully, making sure it was recorded correctly, and had then driven across town in a car that needed an oil change, wearing a jacket over a shirt he had ironed himself with a borrowed iron in a short-term rental apartment. The effect was slightly imperfect in a way that was not strategic, simply human, the appearance of a man doing his reasonable best with what he currently had. Special Agent Dana Mercer was the one who met him. She was 44, sharp in the way that comes from 18 years of watching people decide what to reveal and what to protect. She had learned early that the most interesting thing in any interview is not what people say first, but what they say after they believe the important part is over. She sat across from Derek in a 4th-floor interview room and let him begin. He testified for 4 hours and 17 minutes. He described the man who had come to his apartment, the folder, the $10 million, The specific language, my employer doesn't respond well to refusals, and the 12 hours between that conversation and the breaking of his ribs in the stairwell. He described Aldrin Capital, the USB drive, his family's properties, the 14-month demolition of everything his parents had constructed across 30 years. He described understanding in the specific, belated way that comprehension arrives when all the surrounding noise finally stops, that his entire marriage had been collateral in someone else's long game, that he had been positioned not chosen, moved not loved. And then he described something he had not included in the email, something he had not told Claire. A man in their building lobby, year 2 of the marriage, a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary in every other respect. A man in conversation with the building manager who had turned when Derek entered, not dramatically, not suspiciously, just turned, with the quality of attention you don't register at the time but that surfaces later in reconstruction as meaningful. Derek had seen that same man on delivery day. 3rd floor of the hospital, orderly scrubs, phone in hand, unremarkable, forgettable, designed to be forgotten. I know now that he's the man they call the mechanic, Derek said. I didn't know that then. I'm telling you because if he was in our lobby 2 years before the delivery room, Grant wasn't reacting to Claire's press conference. He was already operational. He had been watching her for years before the inheritance became public. Mercer stopped the recording twice during the testimony. The first time, she stepped out and called her supervisor. The second time, she called the director's office. Both times she came back into the room and sat down and said, "Please continue." When Derek finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Mercer set down her pen and looked at him with the direct, evaluating gaze of someone taking a final measurement. "Mr. Whitfield, your voluntary cooperation today is being noted in the federal record in full. Is there anything you need before we close this session?" Derek thought about it. A genuine pause, the pause of a man actually asking himself the question, rather than performing the consideration of it. "Can someone confirm my son is okay?" he said. I'm not asking for a visit. I'm not asking for anything, just confirmation that he's okay." Mercer looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I'll do that personally." He nodded. "Then we're done," he said. He sat in his car outside Federal Plaza for a long time afterward. Didn't start the engine, just sat. Watched people move in and out of the building, attorneys with briefcases and agents in plainclothes, and the ordinary, unremarkable pedestrian traffic of a city that doesn't slow down for any individual story, no matter how large the story feels from the inside. He thought about the journal, Claire's journal, the one she'd kept throughout the marriage, that had arrived at his hospital bedside in a sealed envelope after his discharge, that he had been told was not a gift but a record, that the last entry was dated the morning of the delivery and ended with, "He had every chance, every single one. I waited, I watched, I gave him time. This is not revenge, this is consequence, and consequence, unlike cruelty, doesn't enjoy itself, it simply arrives. Claire." He thought about 57 minutes on a floor. A boy with his mother's eyes and, apparently, his great-great-grandfather's patience. Already, at 9 days old, regarding the world with a steadiness that made adults feel slightly assessed. He started the engine. Drove home. Made in the specific silence of a car in traffic, the quiet and private decision about who he was going to be. Not announced, not dramatic, just a decision made by a man who had been making mostly wrong ones for long enough that a right one felt in his chest like something new. Nicole Reeves delivered her son on a Thursday morning. 2 weeks after Claire. Same hospital, different floor, different circumstances in almost every particular. No security clearances on the door, no private suite, no attorney on standby. Just Nicole and the attending team, and the particular aloneness of a woman who had made choices that resulted in this specific configuration of people in this specific room. The baby was healthy, 7 pounds 4 ounces. She named him James alone, in the quiet after, with no one's hand to hold, choosing a name associated in her mind with steadiness, with someone who had shown up intact when everything around him was collapsing. She thought of Caldwell when she chose it. She did not tell him. Standard procedure required a paternity genetic panel for the birth record. Results arrived 48 hours later. The attending physician forwarded them immediately to Caldwell's office as previously instructed, given the sensitivity of everything connected to the case. Caldwell opened the file at 7:23 a.m. He read it. He sat down. Read it again. Then said to his empty office, very quietly, in the voice of a man whose legs have made a decision his mind is still catching up to. Oh God. The father on the DNA test was not Derek Whitfield. The father of Nicole Reeves's baby, the man Nicole had spent 3 months assuming was Derek, the man the entire story had assumed was Derek, the man whose name Nicole had expected to see in that results column was Harrison Price. The disgraced board member, Grant's mole, the man who had walked out of the boardroom without a word 8 days ago and was currently in the middle of a cooperation negotiation that the SEC had already declined once. The history between Nicole and Harrison Price stretched back 7 years. A conference in Chicago, a brief, professionally contained, mutually guarded relationship that had ended by quiet agreement when Price's wife became ill. They had encountered each other again 14 months ago at a corporate event, an event that Nicole had attended as Derek's companion, which meant that when she saw Harrison Price standing across a room she had not expected him in, the specific texture of that surprise was one she could not show on her face. They had spoken briefly, exchanged numbers with the careful, professional framing that people who once knew each other well use when they want to obscure what they once knew. Contact had resumed. She had believed in the arithmetic of dates and timing that Derek was the father. She had been wrong. But here was the piece that Caldwell understood, sitting at his desk at 7:23 a.m. with the DNA results on his screen, that turned a personal complication into a structural revelation. Harrison Price had been on Grant Harmon's payroll for 4 of his 6 years on the board. Nicole had been introduced to Derek through Harrison Price, at an event Price had specifically invited her to, citing a colleague he thought she'd have much in common with. Which meant the question was no longer simply, who is the baby's father? The question was, had Nicole been placed in Derek's orbit deliberately? Not by chance, not by attraction, not by the ordinary chemistry of 2 people meeting at a party, but as a piece of Grant's long-game operation to ensure that Derek's marriage to Claire was destabilized at a specific, controlled pace. Caldwell called Mercer before he called Claire. Harrison Price is the biological father of Nicole Reeves's child, he said, without preamble. The relationship predates her involvement with Derek. Price introduced Nicole to Derek at an event he specifically invited her to attend. I need you to put Harrison Price under oath today and ask him directly who told him to make that introduction. Because if the answer goes where I think it goes, we are not looking at a corporate espionage case anymore. We are looking at an operation that reaches into the personal architecture of Claire's marriage from years before anyone on our side knew a marriage existed. Mercer was quiet for 3 seconds. I'll have him in a room in 2 hours, she said. She called Nicole first. Sat across from her in the secure location, the baby asleep in the carrier between them, this new, entirely innocent life breathing in the slow, absolute rhythm of someone with no history yet to carry, and asked her, as gently as precision allowed, whether anyone had suggested she attend the event where she met Derek. Nicole sat very still. "Harrison called me," she said, slowly. "The way you say something when you are discovering its meaning at the same moment you are saying it. He said there was a colleague he wanted me to meet. Someone ambitious, he said. Someone going places. He said we'd have a lot in common professionally." She looked at Mercer. "He meant Derek." "Yes. Harrison introduced me to Derek." She said it again, not because she hadn't heard it the first time, because the second saying was different from the first. The first was information, the second was comprehension, and between them was the specific distance between knowing a thing and understanding what it means. "And Harrison Price," Mercer said, "was on Grant Harmon's payroll for 4 of the 6 years he sat on Claire's board." Nicole looked at her baby. The room was very quiet. When she looked up, her face had the particular clarity of someone who has arrived, through a long and painful route, at a place they can no longer leave. "What do you need from me?" she said. Eliot Ashe had known something was wrong with Harrison Price in the spring of the year Price joined the Harmon Group board. He could not have named it precisely at the time. It was a quality, a misalignment between stated positions and actual outcomes, barely perceptible. Not dramatic enough to be called betrayal, wrong in the specific way that a single flat note in an otherwise clean chord is wrong. Technically within tolerance, wrong nonetheless. Ashe had served on the Harmon Group board for 20 years. He had watched Eliot Harmon build this company and protect it, and occasionally bleed for it with an investment that went beyond fiduciary duty into something older and more personal. The investment of a man who understands that the thing he is building will outlast him, and has decided that this is not a reason for detachment but for greater care. Eliot had never been precisely Ashe's employer. He had been something closer to a model, the specific kind of person you encounter once or twice in a life who demonstrates, simply by existing, what it looks like to operate with absolute integrity over a long enough timeline that the integrity itself becomes the most powerful thing in the room. When Eliot died, Ashe made a private decision. He told no one. He simply began to watch, to document, to keep a file encrypted on a personal drive that never touched the company network, stored in a safety deposit box in a bank he had used for 30 years, of every small, wrong thing he observed. Because he had learned in 20 years of watching Eliot operate that the most valuable thing a witness can do in the presence of slow wrongdoing is not to act prematurely and destroy the evidence. It is to wait, to build the record, to be so thorough and so patient that when the moment arrives, there is no gap in the documentation for the other side to find its footing in. He had been building the record for 4 years. 14 instances of Price's votes coinciding with outcomes that benefited external acquisition attempts traceable, in retrospect, to Aldrin Capital entities. 7 documented conversations between Price and individuals who appeared, cross-referenced against known Grant Harmon associates, with troubling frequency. 3 instances of Price accessing archived governance documents with no connection to any current agenda item, documents related specifically to succession protocols and heir designation procedures. And 1 item that Ashe had listened to 40 times over 3 years without fully understanding, and had never stopped thinking about. A phone call overheard in a conference room anteroom, Price's voice, quiet, certain, believing himself alone, saying, "She doesn't know yet. When she finds out, if she finds out, the timeline moves. Be ready." Ashe had recorded it on his phone in real time. He had never told anyone. He had waited. On the evening before Claire presented the financial records to the board, Ashe had contacted Agent Mercer's office and walked in with his drive. 4 years of documentation. Delivered 12 hours before the board meeting. The board meeting, the motion, the proxies, the financial folder distributed in that perfect coordinated motion, had not been Claire's trap for Price. It had been Ashe's. Claire had provided the occasion. Ashe had provided the foundation. When Mercer briefed Claire on Ashe's file, 3 days after the parking garage, Claire in the hospital bed with a shoulder brace and an expression of focused, continuous attention that the brace did nothing to diminish. Claire was quiet for a long moment. "He did this alone," she said. "No one asked him." "No one asked him," Mercer confirmed. His exact words, and I'm quoting because he was very specific, were, "Eliot Harmon spent 60 years building something worth protecting. The least I could do was take notes." Claire looked at the window. Outside, the city moved at its ordinary pace, indifferent and enormous and full of people doing small, unremarkable daily acts of showing up, which is, in the aggregate, what civilization is actually made of. "Tell him," Claire said eventually, "that when this is over I'd like to have dinner with him. No agenda. I want to hear about the 60 years he knew my grandfather, the parts I wasn't alive for." At the bottom of Ashe's file, the very last item, logged 14 months ago, is a name. A name from Caldwell's office. The person who accessed the sealed envelope before Caldwell opened it. The person who told Grant that Eliot was updating the will. The person who had operated inside the innermost circle of the Harmon legal operation for 11 years and had been feeding information to Aldrin Capital at the moments that mattered most. Mercer reads the name to Claire. Claire does not react. Not because she doesn't feel it. Because she already knew. She has known for 6 days. And she has been waiting, with the patience that is the single most consistent and most devastating thing about her, for the evidence to catch up to the knowing. It just did. The person's name was Thomas Vale. Junior partner, 11 years with Caldwell's firm. Quiet, thorough, universally unremarkable in the specific way that makes someone useful in environments where being noticed is a liability. He had joined the firm at 28, worked his way into the estate management division with patient competence, and had been given access to the Harmon estate files in year 3, a standard progression, nothing anomalous, nothing that stood out against the backdrop of 11 years of steady, clean, apparently loyal work. Grant had found him in year 1. Not through pressure, not through leverage, through money and ideology, the specific combination that is harder to unwind than fear because it comes with its own internal justification. Thomas Vale had believed, and had been carefully cultivated to continue believing, that the disinheritance of Grant Harmon had been an act of corporate injustice, that Eliot, in his age and in his grief over Claire's parents, had made a decision driven by emotion rather than merit, and that the correction of that injustice was not betrayal but rectification. Grant was very good at this. Finding the specific story a person needed to hear, and telling it to them in the specific way they needed to hear it. Thomas Vale had accessed the sealed envelopes file record 4 months before Eliot's death, not the envelope itself, which was in physical storage, but the digital record of its existence, its classification, and the conditions attached to its opening. He had passed this information to Grant's communication network within 24 hours. Which was how Grant knew about the codicil Eliot was planning to add. Which was why the timeline was accelerated. Which was why Eliot Harmon did not live long enough to sign the one document that would have collapsed Grant's challenge before it began. Caldwell called Thomas Vale into his office on a Wednesday morning. He did not tell him why, he simply asked him to come in. Vale sat down across from Caldwell with the composed, alert expression of someone who has been carrying a secret for 11 years and has become so accustomed to the weight that he no longer registers it as weight. Caldwell set Ashe's file on the table. Open to the last page. Vale's name in Ashe's handwriting. The date, the access record, the communication timeline. Vale looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Caldwell. And Caldwell, who had spent 30 years as the most measured, controlled legal mind in the Harmon operation, who had delivered terrible news across conference tables without once allowing his face to become a source of information, said something that was not controlled at all. "He was my friend," Caldwell said. "Elias was my friend for 30 years, and you sat in the next room and fed information to the man who killed him." Vale said nothing. "Your resignation is on your desk. Your attorney has already been contacted. Mercer's office will be in touch today." Vale stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at Caldwell one final time with the specific expression of someone who has rehearsed this moment and discovered, now that it's arrived, that rehearsal was no preparation at all. He walked out. The door closed. Caldwell sat alone in his office for a long time. Then he called Claire. "It's done," he said. "Thank you, James," she said. "Don't thank me," he said quietly. "He was in my house for 11 years. I should have found him." "You built something worth infiltrating," Claire said. "That's not the same thing as failing." A pause. "Your grandfather would have said something like that," Caldwell said. "I know," Claire said. "I learned from him." "Stop. Look at what just happened. 11 years. 11 years Thomas Vale sat in Caldwell's office, and Grant Harmon fed information through him like water through a crack in a wall, patient, invisible, constant. The codicil Elias never got to sign. The envelope accessed. The timeline accelerated. The death that didn't look like murder because it was designed not to. Every single thread of this story leads back to one man. And that man, Grant Aldrin Harmon, is about to make the one mistake that 61 years of careful, untouchable operation never prepared him for. Because powerful men, after long enough without consequence, begin to believe they are exempt from consequence. He is about to pick up his phone. And the line he calls is already being recorded. Bell, subscribe right now. This channel is at 800 plus subscribers and we are fighting our way to 1,000. Every single person watching this story, every person who has been here from part 1, every person who found us at part 2, every person who started today with the hook, you are the reason this channel exists. Hit subscribe. Right now. 2 seconds. Do it before the next scene starts. Speech balloon, drop your location in the comments. We want to see every city, every country, every time zone. Los Angeles, London, Atlanta, Houston, Toronto, Washington, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Liverpool, New York, Montreal, Manchester. Wherever you are watching from, let us see you. And tell us, did you see the Mistress twist coming? Because most people didn't. Most people trusted her completely, just like Claire did. Loudspeaker, share this video with one person right now. One person who has not seen this story. Because the next 3 scenes are the ending, and endings like this one deserve an audience. We are going to 1,000 together. Subscribe, comment, share. Grant is picking up the phone. On the 7th day after the parking garage, with Claire recovering, the FBI investigation active, the asset freeze holding, and every operational layer he had built over 4 years being systematically and publicly dismantled, Grant Aldrin Harmon made the mistake. Not a small mistake, not a tactical error or a miscalculation in a specific operation. The mistake, the kind that 61 years of operating without meaningful consequence produces in a man, the deep, structural assumption, embedded so far below the level of conscious thought that it no longer feels like an assumption but simply like gravity, that the protections which have always held will continue to hold, because they always have, because he is the kind of person for whom protections hold. He called Senator Raymond Holt. 28-year senator, Commerce Committee, Judiciary Committee, the kind of institutional permanence that makes certain figures seem less like people who chose their positions and more like features of the landscape, permanent, weathered, structural. Holt had been a maintained relationship in Grant's network for 19 years, not a formal asset, not an employee. Something more useful than either. A man who owed a series of favors that had never been called in, and who had, over 19 years, developed the very human psychological habit of believing that uncalled favors have an expiration date. That if enough time passes without being asked, the debt dissolves. Grant called him on a Tuesday at 9:47 p.m. on Holt's personal cell. He was precise. He was careful. He said nothing that, in isolation, constituted a crime. He used the vocabulary that men of his background use in these conversations, the language of implication, of suggestion, of the word might doing enormous amounts of structural work. He spoke about overreach and politically motivated targeting and the appropriate role of oversight committees in federal investigations. He referenced two specific favors, briefly and without elaboration, in the way you reference things you don't need to explain because both parties already understand them completely. He spoke for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. He was excellent. He was not excellent enough. Because Senator Raymond Holt had been under FBI surveillance for 8 months. Not for anything connected to Grant. Not for anything connected to the Harmon case. For a completely separate inquiry, procurement fraud in a defense contract running through Holt's committee staff. A patient, meticulous investigation that had been building its file since the previous spring and had, as a matter of standard procedure, been collecting everything on Holt's lines of communication. Everything. The recording of Grant's 11-minute and 40-second call landed on Agent Dana Mercer's desk at 8:03 the following morning, forwarded by the team running the Holt surveillance with a note that read simply, "Thought you'd want to hear this." Mercer listened to it once. Called her supervisor. Her supervisor listened. Called the director's office. By 2 p.m., the Harmon investigation had expanded in a direction that no one in Grant's legal team had anticipated, and that none of his political infrastructure could contain, because the call was not in itself legally explicit enough to be a crime. But in the context of everything already assembled, the forensic audit, Derek's USB, Nicole's statement, Ashe's 4-year file, Thomas Vale's confession, the mechanic's arrest, Petrus's cooperation, it was the connective tissue. The piece that stitched the political protection network to the operational network, to the financial network in a single, documented, Grant Harmon voiced, 11-minute and 40-second line. Grant had spent 22 years ensuring that no single piece of evidence could collapse the entire architecture. He had just provided that piece himself. From his personal phone. At 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Mercer called Claire that afternoon. He called the senator, she said. 11:40 seconds, we have it all. Claire was quiet for a moment. When do you move? She said. We're ready when you are, Mercer said, but I want to give you the option to go first, the press conference, the statement, the audit release. Whatever you want to do publicly, I'll hold the arrest announcement until you've done it. You've earned the right to say it in your own words before the Bureau says it in ours. Another pause, longer. Give me 24 hours, Claire said. You have it, Mercer said. At 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, the baby asleep in the carrier beside her, the hospital quiet in the way hospitals are quiet in the small hours when the machinery of care continues, but the performance of it pauses, Claire Harmon sat up in her bed and wrote something on a single sheet of plain paper. No letterhead, no legal language, no carefully balanced corporate communication drafted by committee and reviewed by counsel. Just her handwriting, that unhurried, precise script that had appeared throughout this story on bracelet engravings and journal entries and hospital notes and divorce filings, and the cover of a manila envelope marked simply with a name. 22 words. She read them once, did not revise them, set the page on the nightstand beside her son's carrier, slept for 3 hours. In the morning she was discharged, dressed carefully, the shoulder brace adjusting the geometry of everything, walked past Thorne in the hallway with a not yet before he could ask, because she knew what he was going to ask and the tower could wait 30 minutes. She went to Caldwell's office first. 3 hours. Quiet, specific, permanent decisions about the company's structure going forward, the independent audit results, the new governance protocols, the appointments, the reinforcements. Then she pushed the plain sheet of paper across the table. Caldwell read it. Set it down. Simultaneously with the FBI press conference, Claire said. All 3 outlets at the same time. The statement, the full forensic audit from 2003, the complete financial documentation of Aldrin Capital's operations and the mechanics identification record. Everything. In the light. Claire, when this goes out with his name attached, with the forensic findings about your parents attached, there is no version of this in which Grant manages the narrative. There is no private resolution, no quiet settlement. This will be permanent. Yes, she said, I know. Is that what you want? She looked at him for a long moment. My grandfather sealed an envelope for 22 years, she said. He loved me and he protected me, and I understand every decision he made. But he also taught me something I don't think he intended to teach me, that keeping darkness in the dark, even for the right reasons, even with love, has a cost that only becomes visible when the light finally comes in. She picked up the page. My parents have been in the ground for 22 years, she said. Grant has been in the shadow for 22 years. I am done with the shadow. She set it back down. Release it with the press conference, every word, every attachment. The 22 words, released simultaneously to the 3 largest news organizations in the country at 10:00 a.m. on a Thursday. The same moment the FBI held its press conference announcing Grant Aldrin Harmon's indictment on charges of murder in the first degree, conspiracy, wire fraud, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation, read as follows. My grandfather kept this secret to protect me. I am releasing it to protect everyone else. Claire Eleanor Harmon. In 12 hours, it had been read 47 million times. The 2003 forensic audit, the plane crash documentation, the maintenance contractor, the $400,000 seed investment, Grant's name beside the transaction, every piece, public, permanent, irrevocable. Not because a court required it. Not because a journalist uncovered it. Because Claire Harmon chose to say it in the light instead of the dark. Because she had decided, at 2 a.m. with a sleeping baby beside her, that her grandfather had been right about almost everything. Except this. Grant Aldrin Harmon was arrested at 11:47 a.m. Not at his residence. The federal team that went to his Connecticut estate found it empty, stripped to institutional neutrality, cleared of everything personal. Not at an airport. His passport had been flagged at 6 a.m. and he had not attempted to use it. He was arrested in the back seat of a black SUV. Parked on the street 3 blocks from the Harmon Group's Manhattan Tower. The same street, the same approximate position, the same view of the building, 43 floors of glass and steel, and 137 years of a name that had outlasted everything thrown at it, including its own blood, that Grant had been looking at from this exact distance on the morning the wire went dead at 10:07 a.m. He had come back. After the indictment announcement, after the 47 million reads, after the forensic audit landed on every front page in the world, and his name sat beside a transaction record connecting him to a plane crash that had killed 2 people 22 years ago. After all of it, he had come back to this street, to this position, to this view. Because some things pull at a person regardless of consequence. Because 61 years of wanting something, of building an entire life around the circumference of something that was taken, or that he believed was taken, which in the geography of obsession amounts to the same thing, leaves a gravity that doesn't simply stop when the legal situation changes. He was looking at the building when Mercer opened the door. He turned and looked at her with the gray-green eyes, the Harmon eyes, Eliot's eyes, Claire's eyes, the same eyes that appeared in 3 generations of this family's faces like a signature they had not chosen but could not escape, and he said nothing. He offered no resistance. Was handcuffed with the precise, routine efficiency of a federal arrest, placed in the vehicle, door closed. The SUV pulled away. Mercer stood on the sidewalk, looked up at the tower. Then she shook her head, slightly, privately, the gesture of a woman who has seen many things in 18 years and has learned to let the weight of the strangest ones settle in before she tries to name them. Got in her car. Drove away. 3 weeks after Grant's arrest, during the systematic review of Eliot Harmon's personal papers, a paralegal found a second sealed envelope in the personal correspondence files. Not the 2003 audit envelope, a different one, older paper, handwriting slightly less steady, the way handwriting changes in the final year of a very long life, the letters larger, the pressure less even, the hand of a man who has something specific and important to say and is spending what he has left to say it. The envelope was addressed to 2 people. First name Claire. Second name Mistress Monroe. Caldwell brought both letters to the Harmon Group office personally, set them on the table in front of Claire without explanation, because the handwriting on the envelope explained itself. Claire picked up her letter. Read it alone in the office, door closed, for 20 minutes. When she came out, her eyes were dry, but the quality of air around her had changed, something settled, something more complete, the specific quality of a person who has received information that answered a question they had been carrying so long it had become structural. She did not tell Caldwell what it said. There are things that belong only to the person they were said to. What is known is that she sat in her car for 45 minutes after. The security detail waited. No one knocked on the window. When she came back in, she asked Caldwell to arrange for Mistress Monroe's letter to be delivered to federal custody, unopened, unread by anyone. He knew about Mistress, Caldwell said quietly, didn't he? For 2 years, Claire said. And he chose not to tell you. He believed she'd choose me in the end, Claire said. He believed the love was real and stronger than what Grant had built around it. He was almost right, Caldwell said. He was exactly right, Claire said. In the parking garage, she didn't aim to kill me. She aimed to stop me, to buy time. My grandfather knew her for 14 years. He knew what she was capable of and what she wasn't. He left her that letter because he understood something I almost didn't. Which was that people who do terrible things for love are not the same as people who do terrible things for greed, she said, and that the difference matters, not legally, but in every other way. Mistress Monroe received the letter on a Thursday morning in her cell. The correctional officer who passed 30 minutes later reported that she was seated on her bunk with the pages in her hands, weeping, not the performative weeping of crisis, not the contained weeping of grief, but the deep, heaving, full-body weeping of a person encountering something so specifically and precisely true about themselves that no defense is available. The kind of weeping that arrives not from pain alone, but from being fully, accurately, mercifully seen by someone who had every reason not to see you that way and chose to anyway. She never disclosed the contents of the letter publicly. What is known, something changed in Mistress Monroe after that morning. Her attorney noted it. Mercer noted it. Something settled. Something that had been in pieces assembled itself, not into what it was before that was gone, but into something different, something that could move forward. She cooperated fully. Her testimony was, by Mercer's assessment, the single most comprehensively useful deposition in the entire case. Maya Monroe's treatment continued without interruption. paid for by the Harmon Group's Medical Charitable Foundation. No announcement, no press release, no Claire Harmon's name attached to it in any public way. Because some things are not done for visibility. Grant Aldrin Harmon was convicted on 7 of 9 counts. Murder in the first degree, 2 counts, Robert and Diane Harmon. Conspiracy to commit murder, the parking garage instruction. Wire fraud, racketeering, obstruction of federal justice, criminal conspiracy. 43 years. No parole eligibility on the murder counts. He entered no plea at arraignment. He said nothing at sentencing. He sat with the Harmon eyes looking at the judge with the expression of a man who has decided that what remains of his dignity requires the performance of composure, and who is performing it and who knows, and who performs it anyway. He has not spoken publicly since the verdict. Senator Raymond Holt resigned from the Senate 8 days after Grant's indictment. His cooperation with both the procurement investigation and the Harmon case resulted in a reduced proceeding. He lives now in a retirement that the word quiet does not adequately describe, the kind of quiet that is made of everything not being said. Harrison Price accepted a plea. 5 years, financial penalties, SEC prohibition. His cooperation produced 17 months of operational intelligence on Aldrin Capital's political network that Mercer described, in a private briefing, as transformative for federal organized crime investigation at the intersection of corporate and political corruption. He is, by all accounts, a man who thinks a great deal about the specific cost of small capitulations made over a long enough time. Thomas Vail cooperated fully and completely. He received a reduced sentence. He gave back, in the cooperation, every piece of information he had ever passed. He has not sought any contact with anyone from the story since his release. Nicole Reeves returned to work 6 months after James was born. Different firm, different city. She was good at her job, had always been good at her job, which was the part of herself that no one had ever been able to take from her, not Derek, not Grant, not any of it. She sent Claire a letter when she left. 2 pages. The handwriting of a woman writing something she had been composing internally for a very long time. Claire wrote back 6 sentences. The last one was, "Your son is lucky to have a mother capable of honesty. Teach him that first. Everything else follows." Derek Whitfield was granted a structured visitation arrangement 8 months after the birth. He had been in those 8 months, in therapy, in a financial situation that was stable, modest, and genuinely his, nothing like the performance of before, but actual. Present for his father, who was old and quiet and had never said the right thing at the right time but had consistently, across all of it, simply been there. The first visit was a Tuesday afternoon. An hour. A neutral location. Third-party supervision. A room designed for exactly this purpose with wooden toys and soft floors and light from a window that was neither institutional nor performed. Derek sat on the floor. Held his son for 57 minutes. He did not cry until he was in his car. Then he cried for a long time. Then he drove home. Made the decision, quiet, private, not announced to anyone, about the person he was going to be. Not because of Claire. Not because of the testimony or the story or the public record of his failures. Because of 57 minutes on a floor and the specific, irrevocable weight of a child who trusts you completely because he doesn't know yet that trust is a choice. He intended to be worth it. He intended to keep intending every morning for the rest of his life. Sandra Whitfield was not charged with any crime. Cruelty is not a federal charge. Laughter, however grotesque, however revealing of the specific interior of a person, is not conspiracy. She received 8 months after the trial a letter from her son. 2 pages. The last paragraph said, "I'm not asking you to be sorry for something you've already been sorry for privately, Mom. I'm just asking you to be different going forward. For him, he's your grandson. Whatever we were to each other, he's your grandson. Sandra read it 3 times, then wrote a letter to Claire. 3 pages. Not an apology, the public statement had been the apology. Something harder. A woman looking at herself with the same sharp attention she had always directed outward, finally turned inward, producing not absolution but something more honest. An accounting. Claire read it. Filed it carefully. Did not respond. Did not need to. Some things are complete when they're said. Whether they're received is a separate matter. James Caldwell retired the autumn after the trial. He had intended to stay longer, had told himself he would stay until the restructuring was complete, until the new governance protocols were fully operational, until Claire had the team she needed and the system she deserved. But the morning after Thomas Vale walked out of his office, Caldwell had understood, with the clarity that arrives sometimes after the specific thing you have been not quite acknowledging finally becomes impossible to not quite acknowledge, that what he actually needed was to stop. He told Claire on a Tuesday. She asked him to stay. He said he was too old to do his best work and she deserved someone's best work. You've always done your best work, she said. This is the last piece of it, he said, knowing when. He still has dinner with her on the first Sunday of every month. He tells her stories about Eliot's, the early years, the mistakes, the recoveries, the specific quality of her grandfather's laugh, which she has never heard and which Caldwell describes with an attention to detail that suggests he has been storing it carefully against exactly this use. She brings her son. The boy, apparently, sits in Caldwell's lap with the easy confidence of someone who has been told, correctly, that he is safe here. Eliot Ashe remains on the Harmon Group board. He and Claire have dinner quarterly, not the formal Sunday dinner with Caldwell, something different, longer, at Eliot's Greenwich estate, which Claire has begun to reclaim as something other than a place where she said goodbye. They eat in the kitchen because neither of them is interested in the dining room, which is large and formal and designed for an audience. They eat in the kitchen and Ashe talks about the 60 years he knew Eliot's and Claire listens with the specific quality of attention she gives to things she intends to keep. The boy sits in a high chair at the kitchen table. He has Eliot's eyes. Ashe noticed this the first time he met him and has not mentioned it, because some things are better held quietly than said, and Eliot Ashe has always understood this. 3 months after the conviction. A Tuesday evening. The Harmon estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The library. Claire sat in the chair she had sat in as a 12-year-old girl the afternoon Eliot had come to her school and said, "You are mine now, and you will never be lost." The same shelves, the same quality of late light through the tall windows, that particular movement of early evening sun across old wood and older books that does not know and does not care about the stories contained in the room, the weight of them, the cost of them, the extraordinary and ordinary love that had been carried in this space across decades. Her son was on a blanket on the floor, working through the serious business of discovering his own hands, which were apparently fascinating and complex and worthy of extended investigation. She had Eliot's journal in her lap. His personal journal, not the legal records, not the corporate files, not the sealed envelope or the forensic audit or any of the documentation that had, across the past months, been read by federal agents and attorneys and journalists and 47 million strangers. His personal journal, the one she had been reading slowly, a few pages at a time, for 6 weeks. The one that was his voice, the specific, unperformed, daily voice of a man she had loved her whole life and had never fully known, because the person you love is never exactly the same as the person they are when no one is watching. She was near the end. She turned to the last entry. His handwriting was not steady. The pen moved with effort, the letters larger and less precise than the earlier entries, the hand of a man spending his final reserves on the things he most needed to say. She read, "I've been afraid for a long time, afraid of what I know, afraid of what I chose not to say, afraid that the walls I built around Claire were love and cowardice simultaneously, and that she will someday have to pay the cost of both." Tonight I watched her on the telephone. She didn't know I was watching. She was talking to her editor about a manuscript she loves, laughing in the way she laughs when she is not performing anything for anyone, when she has forgotten to be careful, the laugh she has had since she was 5 years old, and I am apparently the only person still alive who remembers it. And I thought she is already herself, completely, entirely. Whatever comes after I am gone, whatever Grant does with the time my dying gives him, whatever walls come down and whatever cost the kept secrets carry when they are finally paid, she is already herself. And that is the only thing I was ever actually trying to build. Not a dynasty, not a company, not a name or a number or a legacy that the world would remember. Sorry, I think I managed. I love you, Claire Alina. More than all of it. More than all of it. Elias. Claire closed the journal, set it on the table beside her, looked at her son on the blanket. He had finished with his hands and had moved on to investigating a beam of late light on the floor, following it with absolute, unhurried attention, as though the light were going somewhere worth watching. He looked up at her, found her face, smiled. Not a performance, not a social calculation. The specific, total, completely uncalculated smile of a baby who sees the person that means safe and reflects that safety back without reservation or condition. She smiled back. Outside the tall library windows, the last of the Tuesday evening light moved across the Greenwich lawns in the long, golden, unhurried way of light that does not know about dynasties or murders or sealed envelopes, or the specific cost of silence maintained across 22 years out of love. It was just light, moving across grass, through the windows of a home that had, after everything, after all of it, remained standing. Her grandfather had built this, had protected it, had protected her, and she was still here, still herself, completely. Harmon bleeds last. The end. Grant Aldrin Harmon is serving 43 years. He has not spoken publicly since the verdict. Mistress Monroe completed her sentence and works as a patient advocate at a children's oncology center in Newark. Maya is in remission. Derek Whitfield shows up every Tuesday afternoon. He is on time, he is present, he is working at it. Nicole Reeves is good at her job. She always was. Eliot Ashe still has dinner in the Greenwich kitchen quarterly. He still talks about Elias. Claire still listens. James Caldwell still comes the first Sunday of every month. He still makes her laugh with stories about her grandfather. The boy still climbs into his lap without asking. And Claire Alina Harmon goes to work every morning in the light. Exactly like she promised. Subscribe, comment your location, share this with someone who needs to see how it ends. Thank you for watching all 3 parts. This channel is going to 1,000. You are the reason.